If you are considering an Amaran P60c or any panel light for that matter, here are 5 ways that you could potentially work such a light into your current workflow. So the first way you can use the Amaran P60c as a part of your workflow is potentially as a key light. Currently, that's what I'm using right now, and I got it set up at about a 45-degree angle to me. Usually how I would do if I'm using any type of light is a key light. I want you to note that currently I have the grid and the softbox on this light. Now, one of the things I think would have been beneficial in this particular scenario is for me to turn on another light in a space and just probably bounce it to the ceiling just to bring up the overall ambiance within the space. But this is what we got, so this is what we're going with. It's been a lot of rain, not a lot of daylight, and so this is what we have. So I really just want you to see how the Amaran P60c looks as it stands alone as a potential key light. This is how it looks with a reflector, but on the white side. And this is how it looks with the reflector, but on the silver side. Typically for me, when I bring this outside as a key light is usually if I'm setting up a video testimonial station at an event, or if I'm doing some type of run and gun interviews, right? And those will be the instances where I bring this out when I might not have enough time to set up a full COB light, which is what I prefer, right? But if I'm keeping my kit small, then this is what I'll bring out to use as a key light. And if you're interested in what I typically bring with me to events that also includes the Amaran P60c, I will link that video down in the description below. Now let's get into the second way you could potentially use the Amaran P60c as a part of your workflow. Okay, so check it out. I just had a chance to look at that footage from the last section where I spoke about using the Amaran P60c as a key light. And I know it was a bit dark. I mean, now that I look at it, it's a bit dark here now as well. But there's 2 things I need to say just to clear my conscience. One is I'll be doing you a disservice if I didn't mention that the Amaran P60c is overall gonna have a smaller field. So it's not gonna be as bright as a COB light or something like this where it's my COB light is the aperture 120D, but I also have a light dome 3 on it. So automatically it's gonna be a wider spread when I'm using a modifier that's bigger than a panel of the P60c all alone. In addition to that, I also want to mention that I actually forgot to turn on this backlight here. Bow. And so it's not much of a difference, but it is there. And so now let's officially move on to the second way you could use your Amaran P60c as a part of your workflow. So now that my conscience is clear, it should come as no surprise that if the first way was a key light, then the second way is going to be a fill. So let me just turn this light on real quick. Bow, that's how it looks. So I want you to be mindful when you are using a fill light. Like I said, I usually use a reflector, but when you are using a fill light, that fill light should not be as bright as your key light, because then it defeats the purpose. You really just want you want to have some type of contrast on your subject's face when you are using both the key light and a fill light, or even if you're just using a reflector. And so naturally your fill light should be a bit darker than your key light so that you can see a bit of contrast. Otherwise it just look flat and washed out. Let me look at me for a second. I think it's pretty decent. It's a bit of a gradient that you can see as it go from the high key side to the fill side. But if I was just lower just ever so slightly, you can see it gets a bit darker, right? So let me just turn it off right quick. And this is how it looks without a fill. And this is how it looks with a fill. And right now, I just got this light on 5%. That's it, it's just on 5%. But also, the room is overall fairly dark, so it wouldn't need to be that high anyway. All right, I don't want to spend too much time here, so let's just move on to the third way you could potentially use the Amaran P60c as a part of your workflow. And so the third way you can use the Amaran P60c as a part of your workflow is as a backlight. As you can see right now, I have this splash of blue that's happening behind me, and that is just coming from an Aperture MC, not the Pro version, right? So if I was to turn this off, hold on, give me a second. Bow, click. If I was to turn that off, this is how the scene looks, right? Now let's go back to how it looks with this on, and this is how I usually have it set up. Boom, right? Now, if I was to turn this off again, right, and then use the Amaran P60c in the same way, turn that on, and you can see how big of a difference it makes just because it's obviously a bigger source, right? Typically when I do use backlights, it's to add a splash of color to the scene. And you know, it doesn't matter what color it is. I favor this blue here. It could be red, right? It could be like a yellow, gold-ish type of situation. It could be green. It doesn't matter. Because it's coming from a bigger light source, that's just how it's gonna look. That's just how it's going to spill, right? And another thing I want you to keep in mind is that my back wall is actually gray. And because it's gray, you're gonna get that color in a much more richer tone, right? And so that's what I have going on in here. I used this before during a brand story video shoot with a client, and the backdrop that I used for that production was also gray, and I just sprinkled a little color on the background just to add a little personality to something that may have appeared to be stale. The fourth way I want to get into how this Amaran P60c can be used is as a hair light, right? And I admit that this shot could be a bit better, but I just don't have the space in my space to really set it up. And so I need you to use your imagination, right? You're creative, aren't you? And matter of fact, I can show you how this may look if you was doing just a vertical shot. And like I said, use your imagination. So in case you're unfamiliar with the purpose of a hair light, it's typically used to separate your subject from the background. So as you can see, my hair will probably be blending into everything that's going on back there, right? But by adding this light, it gives that added separation, right? It adds a bit of depth to this image, which is when you would typically use a hair light to separate your subject from the background. I'm gonna get into the last way that you could possibly use this from my list anyway. I'm sure there's other ways that you can add to this list. But before we get to that, if you've been finding any value at all in this video, do me a favor and tap that like button so we can get this video in front of more people. The fifth and final way I want to get into how you can possibly use the Amaran P60c is by setting it up as a source